Anyone got a question for our panel? There's a lady at the back, she was straight up there with her hand. It's okay to get in there.
Hi, I'm Paula. I'm volunteer as a tree warden. I also live in Parklands, which is on the western side of Chichester. One for Steve, BNG and the planning system. When does BNG kick in? Because our experience of the big strategic development sites is that you go for outline and then you have umpteen different parcels of detailed consent. So our big development on the west, it's got its outline and detailed for all of phase 1, which is 750 homes. Phase 2 had a resolution to grant planning earlier this month. That's another 850 homes and some commercial. The planning, there'll be a Section 106 agreement, so the planning won't be confirmed for a bit because experience says the Section 106 agreements take a while. Can we still get BNG on all the detailed planning parcels that will follow through?
Okay, so what happens is on February the 12th, anything that's received on February the 11th or February the 12th will then become subject to BNG. So anything that's received planning permission thus far will not. And when it comes to staged developments, there are other considerations, and I'm not au fait with what they are, I'm afraid. Because they're extremely complicated, and I've been on webinars for the last couple of months where planning professionals, I'm not a planning professional, I'm a counsellor, I sit on planning policy committees and planning committees, but I don't delve into the detail of a planning permission. And they are debating this. They have been debating it for the last few months. How is it going to work with the staged development? And I haven't been privy to those conversations. So I can't help with that. But if it's subject to a planning permission that's already been granted, then it won't fall within scope as I understand it. Has anybody from a local authority got more information? Or am I the most close to planning?
I think it's still, as you say, it's still being developed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, wait for if you can just wait for the thingy, Isabel.
Sorry, I'm not sure if this... I'm Isabel Thurston. So, I used to be a councillor at Arun. I mean, as far as I understand it, the district councils have their own policies built into their local plans. So Chichester is at a different stage to Arun. So I don't know about what Chichester have written into their local plan. But at Arun, we did have, for the last 4 years, something built in. But all I can understand from what Steve's saying is it's not the new official BNG, but they do ask developers to do a biodiversity assessment as part of the development, and they do have to do certain things. But it's coming in to be more official with the new is that right? For I think that's
yeah. So if you have a local plan, you can put in your policy that you want X%, but up to now that hasn't been legally binding.
No, that's
as of February the 12th, it will be.
So that's exactly right. So we at Arun, they have it not legally binding because this hasn't come in from government, but they said we'll have 10%. So developers have to show they're doing 10%, and as Steve said, they can often do it by putting up some bat boxes and making a urban drainage. But I don't think Chichester has the same, so probably the answer is that you'd have to look at the individual plans as they're going in.
Yeah, I think Chichester does have
it. It is the same. Very
it should be.
It won't be exactly the same because the local list would vary, but the 10% will be mandatory from the 12th.
So some councils across the country won't have been doing this. And the good news is, with the government bringing it in right now, it will start to be mandatory. So I hope that's just cleared that up. It's a little bit, fragmented at the moment. Okay.
Can I just say, actually, on that basis, because that's quite interesting. We've been saying this for years and years. We've been working with local authorities to actually get gain out of planning, and it's always been a principle for a very long time. But it hasn't been mandatory. and it hasn't actually happened in practice. So there's been a lot of good songs sung, but very little actually happening on the ground. Now this should at least start the process of making it mandatory, so things should be measurable and delivered.
Yeah, I'm Matthew Denny. I'm a consultant ecologist. Just going back to that question about phased developments, as far as I understand it, there will be a need to prove the principle that in the outline stage of planning, the principle that you will be able to deliver a biodiversity net gain of 10%, but the detail will always be left to the in a phased development to the reserved matters stages, so that they will be conditioned at that point. So even though, so in theory, the local authority will have to be happy that they can deliver the 10% gain at that outline stage, but then the detail comes during the reserved matters stages.
So for a development that's already been given planning permission, if the later stages come forward after February the 12th, will they be included or excluded?
I'm not sure, actually.
Yes,
that's what I don't know.
But I don't think anyone seems to know that. No. Yeah, to be honest with you, I like you. Yeah, into many webinars. Yeah.
There are some specifics around this, so I can try to look into that and get back to you outside of the meeting, if that's okay.
Fabulous, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't think that's working actually. I'm not sure.
It's not mine, it's a recorder.
Oh, is it? Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so-
you. Yeah, it was really, really interesting, super interesting. All of your, stand up, Shine.
Go on, Polly.
Stand up, Shine. Go for it. Thank you. No, seriously, that was really, really super interesting. All of your talks were brilliant. Personally, I'm really interested in how LNRS, BNG, Biodiversity Net Gain, might or should actually, from my perspective, fit under the umbrella, the resilience and adaptation umbrella, because resilience and adaptation is going to go zooming up the agenda. We've just had the worst flooding, very bad flooding, certainly down here, across at Barnham, etc. We're going to get much more of that flooding, and then possibly, everything's, rather than bobbling along like we have for a few 100,000 years, we're now going like this with the climate. So we're going to get droughts in the summer. And I'm wondering how BNG, how the brilliant stuff you've been talking about this evening, fits under the umbrella of resilience and adaptation. I think that the third or the fourth National Adaptation Plan is actually out now. It's online. And also I think the National Trust, the only organisation that I've happened to have heard about, they've actually called for resilience to be put into legislation. In other words, a law about resilience. And I'm wondering how, rather than sort of a bit siloised, these things are going to start talking to each other and building each other up. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, just briefly, a very, very important point, very interesting. From what I've seen of the local nature recovery strategy, in fact, we've had things looking like that for a very long time, the whole idea of how you enhance the environment. I'd say environmental adaptation and resilience is actually centrally in that, because when you look at the central tenets of nature conservation, better, bigger, more enjoined, linking up the environment, that's how you build an environment that's resilient to change and adaptable. So it is the subplot, it's not even a subplot, it's the main plot all the way through. I think there's something to watch though, because BNG to some extent is individual sites. It's when you lock that in some way to the local nature recovery strategies, and if they are themselves working much more on an ecological network principle, which most of them are, then it should start to come together. I suppose I would worry if things started to fall down into their silos, which is sometimes what happens. But I think the whole movement in nature conservation, and some of the others here may correct me or develop, I don't know, is actually towards working at landscape scale and making things sure things do link up, and that you have relevant habitats that link together and actually are resilient.
Yeah. For instance, leaving wetlands or encouraging wetlands that can absorb much more water before it causes a problem further down, etc. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I can pass that on, please. Thank you. Is that me?
Yeah.
I'm Diana Beale, and I'm a landowner of a diversified farm with a lot of conservation stuff in the middle of Chichester Harbour. And when everything is about connectivity and joined up thinking and all that, I'm quite surprised that Chichester Harbour hasn't even had a mention when it's right there, only a mile or two away. And everything that you've been talking about, there's been a lot going on in Chichester Harbour for years. So, for instance, it was about 12, 15 years ago that there was the work done called Valuing Chichester Harbour, which was one of the first ever ones to put an economic value on both nature and the leisure industry, etc. Also, for the last 2-3 years, they've had a nature recovery officer. They've had a farming liaison officer who helped us get a FIPL grant, which means farming in protected landscapes, for swift swallows, bats, boxes, etc. And there's more besides going on at Chichester Harbour. So we should really be celebrating using the examples that are already there. I mean, I presume you tie in with them all, do you, at Chichester district level?
I mean, so that's what some of the corridor projects are. They're going to try and connect sort of the downs right through to the harbours. So that's part of what the aim is for those projects.
Sure.
And I guess the wheel to waves is similar, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the wheel to waves' focus, and part of what's formed the corridor to be where it is. You can see there's that sort of hook going down towards Chichester. Sure. So we're quite sort of aware there's been a huge amount that's gone on.
Jolly well needed a mention tonight because there's all this brilliant stuff going on right here.
I think that's really key, because that ties into the strategic significance thing I was talking about. So that is already a very valuable functional site. So linking that within the local plan for Chichester and identifying that and linking Biodiversity Net Gain to that, and then further afield towards Wheel to Waves,
and there's
all
a lot
becomes
of money.
part of this network.
There's a lot of money for land, and there's more money coming from the government under FIPL.
Yes.
And I think the environment manager is looking for, people like me, landowners, to draw up great plans. Just the sort of thing you're talking about, really.
Yeah, it certainly plays a big part in all of this idea.
Yeah.
Can we give it to Anne or Deb? Anne first.
Thanks. I'm Anne. I'm part of the local Green Party. That was a really very interesting talk, and it's really encouraging hearing about actual practical projects that are happening, like you've just described and like came up in your talk. That's really encouraging. I'm one of the pessimists amongst us, though. Don't trust the developers at all. So what Tony said was actually very encouraging. But one of the things that you said, Steve, that really struck me was local governments suffering so many cuts. There's going to be some poor sod trying to do 101 things at one time. So is there a role for people like us who know our particular areas, and can make comments in terms of planning and in planning applications? Do you think that is worthwhile?
It's always getting involved in your local planning applications and sending in comments as residents, yes. Whether that will have an impact on how the assessments are made for Biodiversity Net Gain, I don't know, because it's going to need such a level of knowledge and expertise. And Biodiversity Net Gain is still only one factor that's considered when a planning application is being considered. It doesn't say yes or no, it can go ahead. It's one of the elements, like lots of other things that don't seem to get the adequate weighting that residents may wish. So yes, get involved, send in your comments, but I'd keep your fingers crossed, I guess.
Thank you.
Deb had a question.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm Deborah. I live near Arundel. I'm just trying to get my head around how the money side of it. So how is a biodiversity net gain unit, how is the value of that established, and how and when does the money get from a developer to a piece of land that's going to be offset or whatever? I can't get my head around that.
Okay.
Can anyone?
I could do it, but go for it.
Okay.
Yes.
you've got your developer, Stephen. Well, I don't know. The developer is obliged initially to try and see if they can do the biodiversity net gain on site. So on the site of that development. Sometimes that will be possible, and it will be sensible to do it ecologically. Sometimes it won't be possible, or it won't be sensible to do it ecologically. The developer would then want and be obliged to look for an off-site biodiversity net gain site as close as possible to that development. Again, if that is not available, and we don't know what will be available at the moment because it's very early days in the whole system, then they would look for something in an adjacent planning area.
Yes, but how is...
Yeah. Can I take it further?
Yeah.
There's also the concept of the biodiversity credit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, if it can't be delivered on site or nearby on the developer's land, then that biodiversity unit has a value, and they have to pay that money as a biodiversity credit, which can then be spent elsewhere.
Yeah.
Now,
but how do they determine
and I don't
that
know what the value is, but the value is high. And a lot of people are looking at this.
Some of them if you
Well, I'm just aware that the value is high, which is why some of these financial people are actually quite interested in how this is going to work. They've seen the biodiversity credits that could come their way. They want to deliver something, and they see that as the way of delivering it. It could have such an effect that it's actually changing the economics of land ownership. And some of the whole discussion around the value of forests, for example. Forests used to have a much lower value in comparison to agricultural land. That's starting to change because of the way that can be used in biodiversity net gain, amongst other things. So there is some economic changes around this, which means that those biodiversity credits do have a significant value. It doesn't seem to be token.
No, to put it into perspective, if it's a higher level of biodiversity, the more costly it will be to recreate that habitat. So, off the top of my head, and you might know some of these better than me, let's say you had a biodiversity unit of, I don't know, arable land. It's not very biodiverse. It might be worth, I'm going to guess, because nobody actually knows fully yet, in terms of off-site biodiversity, that might be £20,000 for a biodiversity unit of arable land. Yeah. If you wanted to do the same, but that might be like, I don't know, 2 acres of land or whatever, something like that, or a hectare of land, something like that. If you wanted to do the same thing for forest, if you had, a hectare of high quality woodland, not irreplaceable, but that might be 4 biodiversity units, or 6 or 8, depending on the quality of it and the condition and where it was and that sort of thing. So you might be looking at, £100,000 for your hectare of woodland, because it's equivalent of 4 biodiversity units, and you would have to replace it with more woodland. So if when you get onto the more biodiverse types of habitat, you have to replace it like for like. You can't swap it for, 20 acres of fields. It has to be like for like. So that's going to incentivise developers not to build where the more valuable, more biodiverse habitat is, because it's going to cost them a lot more to recreate it, to compensate for it, to offset it, whatever they choose to do, it's going to cost them more. So it should.
Right.
Does that make sense? Yeah?
Well, in a way. I can't get my head around what happens if you've got a species. There's specific. You can't always say a habitat is entirely a proxy for species. There will be known specific species.
But that's the same. All the regulations that we have already in place for protected species, none of that goes away. Biodiversity doesn't cover it, but it's all still there. So if it's got great crested newts, they still have to be mitigated for. If it's got bats, in the flight zones, you have to. All that mitigation is still in place. The biodiversity is on top.
And who hires the ecologist for these baseline studies? Will it still be the developer?
Yes.
There will be pressure, but there is an ecological standard for ecologists. If you're a SCI member, you have your industry integrity that you sign up to, and all those sort of things. But yes, as an ecologist, working as a consultant ecologist, I get pressure from clients. What your job is to say, well, no, actually, that's not what you can do. This is what you can do, but this is the most efficient way of getting through that.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say actually a bad ecologist is a very good ecologist to be against in a public inquiry.
Yes, it gets that far.
Speaking from experience.
Yeah, Deb, sorry.
I wanted to find out who covers the cost of monitoring this, because presumably over time it's got to be monitored, because there was promise the earth, and then a good example being national highways and their woodlands that they plant, and hundreds of thousands of trees which normally get lost. And the other point on which I think is actually quite related, and why I can't see how gardens could be included, say in a housing development, could be included, because one, you can't guarantee what would happen with the gardens. You could start off with lovely trees and got lots of native species in there, and then the house owner goes and tarmacs the lot. So as far as I can see, that should be completely excluded, and there shouldn't be any argument about that. But how do you monitor and ensure that the quality is there and maintained over time?
Okay, there's multi-parts to the answer. I'll do the last bit first, which is the gardens bit. So all gardens are classed as a vegetated garden. That's it, no matter what goes on inside that garden. Where the confusion has been is regarding the ongoing 30-year legal obligation. So how do you enforce that with a private garden? Would a developer need to enter into a legal agreement with each individual landowner, and would there need to be a management plan for that garden? All of these conversations have taken place. It turns out that no, if you're delivering that as part of your on-site delivery, your BNG on-site, it falls below the threshold of significant. So it's a lowish value, therefore you don't need a legal agreement, so it could be included in the calculation. But the conversations that have been going on with the planning authorities that I've been involved with, the planning professionals, is they're suggesting that no, they're going to be excluded. We're not going to take that as habitat. It's going to be lost habitat from the baseline condition, the field that it was built on. But I'm sure there will be legal challenges to that. When it comes to monitoring, again, there's two bits to this. There's monitoring that's been undertaken by the developer on site. They have to submit a monitoring plan to the local authority, but the local authority only says, yes, we've received the monitoring plan. It's not planning officials going to the site and checking that it's doing its ecological functionality. When it comes to off-site, the developer will enter into a Section 106 or conservation covenant with the planning authority, and they will then take over the monitoring and the reporting and the enforcement. But there will be a cost to the developer for that at the start of the development to cover the 30 years that will be required by the local authority to do that monitoring and enforcement, should it all go wrong. So it's paid for by the developer to the local authority if it's an off-site gain, or whoever's delivering your off-site obligation, because landowners can register their sites. We could, as a local authority, register a site and run it as Biodiversity Net Gain. Then we'd be responsible for delivering the BNG, we'd be responsible for monitoring and enforcing. But then it gets a little bit murky about conflict of interest. So the idea is you'll enter into a conservation covenant with an external body like a wildlife trust, who will be the responsible body overseeing what happens in local authorities or something like the national park. Yes, there are ways of doing it. Payment is basically the developer off-site.
30 years doesn't sound that long.
Sorry?
30 years doesn't sound that long. Maybe it's just I'm old.
It's a 30-year minimum. It's a 30-year minimum, and there was a conversation about how we came up with how the 30 years was come up with, and it turns out that that's the minimum requirement for a woodland. So everything else can be delivered within 30 years other than woodland, but you can deliver a type of basic woodland in 30 years. But it might extend longer than that. It's a minimum 30 years. It's down to a negotiation between the landowner and the local authority as to what the length is. It could be in perpetuity. That's a discussion for the lawyers.
Duncan, can we pass the Duncan?
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, Duncan. So there you go, huh?
Hi there. I'm interested in, we all know pesticides are a huge threat to biodiversity. And I wonder if there's any aspect of the work that the panel is doing around biodiversity net gain where that's actually factored into any of the formulas. For example, if developers pledged not to use pesticides or in a very limited way on their new estates, would that be something that would be taken into account? Is there any space for pesticides to be brought into this mix?
That's interesting.
Anybody or?
I hesitate the idea of actually being paid to not do something. We've done that before, haven't we? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it should be something that's, if it's biodiversity net gain, then they shouldn't be using pesticides.
It will depend on the management plan. So once a planning permission has been given, after that point, the developer will submit the gain plan. And the gain plan will set out in detail what management will be undertaken to get you from A to B over your time period for the habitat you're trying to create. And that may or may not include herbicides depending on what the starting point is. So if you have a load of Japanese knotweed on site that you wish to inject with glyphosate, then that might be part of the management plan to eradicate before you start your process of getting back to whatever habitat you want to create. It will be in the management plan. Whether or not there will be a desire to exclude certain practices, I don't know.
Okay.
And that may be challenged on cost by developers. If you say, no, actually you can't use glyphosate or some other herbicide to get rid of your invasive species, you have to do it by hand, which will take a lot longer and be more intensive, therefore more cost.
Okay.
So there may be viability arguments around that.
I suppose a similar point would relate to lighting as well, potentially as well, and what lighting is used by the developers. I mean, there are just so many different aspects to this.
Yeah, but again, that comes back down to the protected species bit, which is outside of BNG, so then that should be covered off, hopefully.
The gentleman sort of back there.
Who's for the woodlands? You know, if you're offsetting an ancient woodland and they've got to reconstruct something somewhere else, who's responsible for looking after it? You know, for the 30 years, obviously, you know, trees need looking after for the A period. Is that up to the developer, or do they have to provide somebody?
Anybody else who want to?
Just briefly, I mean, ancient woodland is one of the irreplaceable habitats. So that can't be destroyed. It's not part of biodiversity net gain.
Okay, not ancient woodland, but a woodland.
Choose another woodland. But I think the point is that management is part of the original cost that's agreed with the developer. I think any management to reach your biodiversity net gain is part of the cost on the developer.
So they would be responsible for looking after it for a period of years, or
for the 30 years. And if they don't deliver it, then that starts to become an issue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's all sorts of
Who monitors that?
That's monitored by independent ecologists and
the planning,
paid for by the
planning authority as well, the local planning authority.
Yeah.
So that is included in their money that in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because let's say if the developer goes bust, for example.
Well, the money's paid for up front.
It's paid up front.
Through a Section 106 agreement. So there will be wording within the condition, within the Section 106, that says prior to the occupation of the first house or the last house, you will transfer to the council X £1,000 for monitoring and enforcement of said
woodland,
whatever it might be. There will be model conditions that will be adopted by local planning authorities when it comes to ensuring that this money comes forward. Interesting you mentioned HS2 there.
In connection with ancient woodlands being...
Yeah, they're also exempt from BNG.
No, they are.
They are.
But at the time, they just took these trees out, even though it was in legislation that it shouldn't be destroyed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now they've destroyed the whole route.
Yes.
Oh, sorry to say something else. Just to say, I mean, I think one of the slightly, unintended consequences for those of us who who are in the areas not in the nationally protected landscapes or any other protected landscapes, is that developers are already looking for an easy life. So, for example, they'll avoid brownfield sites often because of contamination. Now they already will avoid anything that's got anything special on it in terms of habitats, but they will be going for the farmland now, and pasture land is up for grabs, really, because that's the easiest thing to sell off. So we just got to keep an eye on, how that's valued as well, really, because I think we're in danger of having some urban tracts and some beautifully protected landscapes, which is sort of the way we've been heading anyway. But I think if we can get the corridors built at least through the middle and round the edges, that will be the best that could come out of this. Just an observation, really. Sorry, no question in there particularly. There you go.
Yeah, Matthew Denny, consultant ecologist. I'm just interested in this idea of the small garden sites and the fact that I can understand that there is no control over gardens once they're sold off, but then that's going to be the case for existing gardens and for other private land. We know that a lot of good habitats that are unprotected are wiped out day after day after day, usually through naivety. The owner doesn't understand, doesn't know what they have. Now, is this not actually an opportunity to put biodiverse habitats into gardens where, in my experience, most people actually value the biodiversity in their gardens, and they have no particular wish to get rid of what is valuable, and yet they generally go out and, if they get a new lawn, they get ryegrass turf, and in this case we have an opportunity to start off with a biodiverse garden and to at least give them the information about why it's valuable, what's there, how they might identify it, and how they might manage it properly for however long they live there, and even pass the information on to the next person who lives there. I think that's a really valuable part of BNG which is being lost. I don't know what you think.
It sounds like a really good comment. I mean, yeah. I remember I tried to do this a long time ago with a development, which was at that time on an ancient woodland site. They did used to do it. And we were talking there about, well, how about making the whole housing estate now a local nature reserve, with actually all the roadside verges, all the gardens actually being given information, so that actually they could see themselves as part of a very important site. We'd already lost the case of protecting the ancient woodland. Can we do something else? It didn't go anywhere. But maybe this is a development that could actually be worth following up.
It would have to be done on a community level.
Yeah,
and you couldn't do it on an individual basis and hope for it to succeed, but on a community level.
Oh, no, I mind it worked. Isn't it fantastic? We're moving to this housing estate and we've all got part of this local nature reserve and we can all join together for delivery. But it didn't go anywhere.
I think with the private garden, I think it potentially could work, but it depends on who owns the garden. So as a developer, I might spend £1,000 making this beautiful garden bioscape, and actually somebody wants to put up a football net and some ryegrass because it's durable and they don't mind if the dog trashes it. Whether a developer would say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to be really good about BNG and I'm going to include the gardens in my calculation, but I'm going to set this standard for the species mix within the garden. That, I think, has got some scope, but again, it's not legally enforceable. But it will depend on the developer and the homeowner.
If the Green Party were in government, we'd make it a law.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to enforce it, Duncan.
It's a really good point, actually, isn't it, Duncan? And I think any of us who've been watching this for the last 25 to 30 years, the underlying thing that everybody has to understand is that nothing will get better without green politics. It's that simple. So you have to give, you have to volunteer, otherwise it doesn't get better. Yay! We've been watching it long enough. There have been lots of conservation efforts. Biodiversity is still declining. Something's got to get better. That's politics.
Agreed.
Right, and on that note, one more question, Carol. Oh, can I announce you? Can I at least announce one person? Carol is our Green parliamentary candidate for Bognor and Littlehampton.
It's supposed to be neutral. So.
Thank you. I also work for a housing association, and one of the things we've been talking about when we're looking at developments, because actually they're very keen to introduce the net gain, but they have the complication of how do you manage it without cost, because the residents are very concerned about service charges, and where they've tried to introduce it, they've hit problems where people have said, oh, that looks messy, they don't like it, and then they've had to change the management plan. So it's a really complicated subject to bring into an estate so it carries on and is preserved for the future. And yeah, we just wanted to raise some of the complications that we had.
Which speaks to my concern during what I was saying about the on-site delivery, that you will get comments that it's messy, it's not what I want for a public open space. I can't kick a football because the grass is too long, there are brambles, stuff is in the way, which is why in some of those situations making a very valid argument to shift that on-site obligation off-site may be the best approach for that situation. So I completely agree, it is difficult.
There's two different things here though, aren't you? Because what you're talking about is something which, well, you're trying to deliver gain, but it's not part of a biodiversity net gain financial agreement, so you haven't got the money. So that's right. You're actually trying to deliver something because it's the right thing to do. And that's really common. That happens everywhere. The way I see this, well, it's quite a common issue that the Wildlife Trusts have had to address quite often. Can we offer some sort of advice on low-cost ways of doing things? Can we offer advice or suggestions on how to make a messy thing look tidy, which you can do? How do you set up sorts of management which can continue into the future with less intervention? Sometimes conservation management is cheaper than actually the high-intensity management you're already doing. You can redirect resources to something a little bit different. So these things are possible. But the other thing I'd say is that actually if we're looking at a large area and there's lots of things happening, if you can get the balance in the right direction, yeah, it's quite legitimate for some people to kick a football around in some areas, as long as there's, for every one area like that, there's two areas which are going towards biodiversity. And habitats are dynamic, it may go the other way another time, but you want as many things improving as degrading, well, more things improving than are degrading on balance, and then you can have this dynamics.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone. I'm just going to do one more thing while we're here because it's just been pointed out to me. Tim, where are you? Is he still here? Right, stand up please. Sorry, how embarrassing. Tim is also our Green Party parliamentary candidate for Chichester. So, sorry, I should have given you both a warning. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind joining me again in thanking Oliver, Alex, Tony and Steve. They've been marvellous tonight. It's been great to listen to their talk. Thank you all so much for coming. It's been a pleasure.